Mewing is a sapphic body horror novella that centers on a small time Instagram model named Vixen who moves to the wonderful LA in order to pursue her career in modeling. But she's struggling a little bit. And she comes across this friend of hers who's a little bit more interconnected in the social media community, the beauty guru influencer community, and she tells her about this little influencer co-op called the Bleach Babes, which is led by this supermodel named Margot. So Vix ends up getting an invite to go to this manor, and she ends up meeting Margot and is taken under her wing and into her bed. But Vixen quickly learns that there are other things going on in this house that are messing with her perception of reality, as well as messing with her sense of self, to the point where she's set on a destructive path.
So where I wanted to start talking about mewing specifically is the main character is or wants to be a social media influencer. And so there's a real kind of foundation of the social media world and influencer kind of stuff. So is it something that you're aware of and you're like, I know enough where I can make this the platform for this story? Or is it something where you're like, there's something about this situation that lends itself to the type of story I'm trying to write? Or I guess in basic terms, like, why did we go with social media and influencers?
That's a really good question. I think that there's kind of, I think that the answer is a little bit of both. I've never been a super, like, I don't have a huge following or anything like that. But I have been in positions where I've been in kind of a more public light. When I was running my own YouTube channel, I was covering like indie games and things like that. So I was making a lot of like let's plays and things like that for indie games. And when I was working for different like journalism outlets that were dedicated to video games, there was also just a kind of a part of when you work in those industries, I think that there's a part of yourself that you have to be curating constantly. And there's like a certain, like there's a certain kind of rigidity to it where you have to make sure that you give yourself enough personality, but not too much that people will like pull back or that they find something to attack. So I think that a little bit of that is definitely from personal experience. Again, I was never like a big enough person to ever like get a huge amount of experience, but I guess it's just something I was hyper aware of. And then I think on the other hand, I'm just really fascinated kind of by between the relationships, like the kind of the parasocial relationships that people have with influencers, just kind of the ways that we get attached to them and how they can influence us, not just only to buy things, but in like the beauty industry or in like fashion, or lifestyle things. It's like changing entire parts of your body. And so I thought that this would be a good way to kind of, I thought that social media would be just a good backdrop, I guess, for a horror book. And then also just kind of thinking about my own relationships to like beauty and fashion and things like that growing up as like a young girl. I know you grew up, like I grew up in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, like to the 2010s. And I had, there's just this kind of complicated relationship, I think, that you develop when with your body when you grow up seeing kind of edited like magazines and things like that. And early 2000s diet culture was really horrible. And unfortunately, I think we're in a period of time where it seems to be making a comeback where people are saying like skinny is in again and it's horrible. So like I think that just that entire landscape, there's so much to say about it. And I wanted to save my own piece. And it's just a very narrow piece of that kind of conversation. But I think it's just so fascinating and so rich.
I love everything you just said so much that I'm not going to like tag onto it because I would just basically fumble to say something that you said way better. But good. That's awesome. And then something I thought of with writing specifically as it has to do with social media, because I listen to like podcasts where, you know, it's writers talking about blah, blah, blah. And I feel like there's a general sentiment from authors or writers about social media and having to basically like, in addition to create, also be a brand
Yeah.
and push engagement. And that's like almost to the person. Everybody hates social media. Josh Malerman very recently was talking about not being a Twitter guy, and there's so much of that. And I've always thought to myself, I just choose to engage how much I want to. But
Mhm.
then the flip side of that is, if you look at how much like followers and how much of a thing I've built up for myself,
Yeah.
it's a small group of people. So like I think that I'm kind of proof that there's gotta be like some sacrifice to get the thing, because like, and I'm just not willing to go there. So like
Yeah.
my connections are very genuine and very organic, but there's also a smaller group than if I was like more careful about
Right.
that. So I know I just hit you with a lot, but like the author side of it is like, man, I resent this often because I have to do this creative thing, and then I have to go like shill for reads and stuff. So there's that
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, I think it definitely in some ways can feel a little gross. The idea that you have to, the idea that there's so much of yourself that you have to present online and that you just have to kind of be aggressively marketing all the time. And how much time of that it takes. And it's just like, I think that the likes, the comments that you get on your work can like make or break your day. Like the lack
Yeah.
of likes or just the absence of social media presence when I like make a post can just make me feel so bad because I'm like, oh man, like what am I doing? Why am I not getting reach? Maybe I'm not like likable enough. And I'm like, wow, that spiraling so fast. And yeah, I definitely agree that it's frustrating. On the one hand, I love being able to connect with other people because I think that writing, if you're not careful, it can make you feel very like insulated and isolated. But I've been very fortunate in that I've been able to connect with so many people and so many authors online, and I think that those are the relationships that I've developed that kind of keep me going or make the social media aspect worth it.
Yeah.
Certainly too when interacting with readers. um but man, it's when you're trying to increase your reach or something and you're just like, how hard do I have to work, what parts of myself I'm willing to put online, and just constantly kind of tweaking this and just being hyper vigilant about it. It feels almost, like I have a full-time job and then I have a job as a writer and then this is like the third job, and
Yeah.
that I think makes it so exhausting.
Yeah. I will say, in preparation for talking to you, I looked at a bunch of your reels and stuff on Instagram, and I like your content a lot. It's like
Thank
easy to
you.
engage with and fun and like kind of modern and relevant and stuff, or whatever it is. But like, so I like seeing like your content pop up because, and this will tie into something I'm going to talk later once we've got past mewing and we're talking about your writing in general, about how I guess I'll say it, but like one of the things that I've enjoyed about learning more about you is you not seeming to shy away from just really fucked up stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so,
For sure.
but we can dive into that later on after we're done talking about mewing. But that's refreshing for me when someone's just like, look at this fucked up thing. Um, but going back to the beauty aspect and the I guess the self image aspect of like wanting to be an influencer, and in the book specifically, it's someone who wants to be a model.
Mhm.
That's kind of the goal. She wants to be a model because it's almost like there is a sacrifice. You lose something of yourself. You're trading something of yourself in order to get the thing that you think is going to make you happy. And I feel like that's kind of a big theme of the book. And obviously, like the way that you had mentioned it already, it's in a very literal, like how much time do I want to spend? How much do I want people to know about me? But in the
Mhm.
book, it gets kind of sinister in a different way too.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to kind of explore I guess that in regards to how it gets sinister and kind of ties into some, I guess, paranormal is not the right word for it because it's really just like a demonic presence. But I was thinking about her Vix, the main character, as this cautionary tale. Because
Yeah.
this is essentially a character that keeps sacrificing her self-esteem over and over again to build this fake persona of herself. And meanwhile, like whoever she was as a person before meeting Margot and the rest of the Bleach babes, like it's gone. It gets it's like eradicated. And so I knew that there was there's this other kind of thing, I guess, in the industry when it comes to like nepotism, and how so much of being able to succeed, especially in like the creative industry, is just based on who you know and who you're connected to. So I
Yeah.
think that like the presence of the demon is supposed to serve, in my mind, it's supposed to serve. I don't know how effective it is as a metaphor for nepotism, but like I wanted it to be there to serve as a metaphor for nepotism. The idea that they're engaging with this demon in order to try to get ahead, that there's some kind of supernatural element to how they're going about this. But I mean, it results in bloodshed. It results in just like horrible things happening to other people, and horrible things that they do to themselves. It just kind of spirals really out of control, which yeah.
Yeah. And it's because I was one of the questions. I'm just going to dive into this because it kind of seems relevant to what we're talking about. But like one of the things that I was thinking about was when I was reading this book, I was thinking about how um, it really feels kind of like that met the devil at the crossroads and made the deal to like, you know, be, might be a good musician or whatever, that type of thing. So there's just a general tone of that with, and so obviously like Vix, the main character, her experience is specific to her situation, but there's very much of feeling of that. Like sold my soul for my art kind of a thing. Um, and so that's like, but like kind of a modern take on that, a vision of like, what would that look like, in today's, age and everything. Um, and then the thing specifically about Vix, so you can either respond to that or what I'm about to say. The thing specifically about Vix that I was thinking about, especially when you were just talking about what you just said, is that there's almost like a stubbornness to her where um, she won't back down. Like, and if
Mhm.
it takes, like, it's almost like she'll shoot herself in the foot to like not be wrong or not fail. And so that's like, I feel like her undoing is this characteristic of just like pushing herself farther than maybe she should. So anyway, that was two thoughts. It was like her characteristic that I think was her failure, but then also the idea that it was like a meet the devil at the crossroads kind of thing is kind of the theme of, or the tone of it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely the meet the devil at the crossroads to try to get ahead. I kind of thought about other people who had like other kind of people who had arisen to fame, and like some of kind of the dirty ways that they would have to do it, like friend, just like across anything, like musicians, thinking about musicians who have had to like leave behind their creative partners so that they could get ahead.
Yeah, yeah,
Thinking about maybe actors and even like directors that possibly had like mistreated different people so that they could get like their certain vision made or like a certain product made. And I think that there's this point where the relationships that you have with other people matter. And at a certain point, when Vix gets to this point where she's making this deal with the devil, I think that she's kind of saying that none of her relationships matter anymore, only her own wants and desires. So she does still, in a sense, like want that relationship with Margot, but at a certain point, I think that that becomes devoid of like a genuine love that she may have for her, and more trying to just stay grounded like within the Bleach Babe cooperative. And then yeah, for her, she just kind of pursues failure. She's just kind of this character. I wanted her to be very obnoxiously naive,
yeah,
because I feel like there are a lot of the popular voices that we see in the social media landscape. Not that like people aren't like per se like educated or anything, but I think that when you spend so much of your time online like curating this persona, you might become like blind to other things that are happening in the world and other experiences. So when
yeah,
Vix has that kind of challenge by Darlene, for example, like Darlene who's basically saying, hey, like she, like this person in the house, like I don't know, she clearly has like this eating disorder. And Vix is like, I mean, yeah, but like, what are we going to do about it? And like, she doesn't really engage with this. And Darlin tries to tell her to leave and tries to tell her to get out, and like is essentially mapping out all the ways in which like this relationship with Margot is not symbiotic, but in fact like parasitic. And she just kind of ignores all that, because she just doesn't want to face the truth. She wants to get what she wants at all costs. Um, and yeah, I think that in some ways I think that it's fun to see a flawed character, who I think at times can be a little bit unlikable, but you just kind of want to keep reading about her because she just doesn't stop. You think that there's going to be a stopping point where she maybe like pulls back, but then she doesn't.
And honestly, so you got me thinking about a couple of things, but first of all, I like you saying that she pursues failure. That's brilliant. But when reading through the book, obviously your mind kind of naturally tries to think about where's this going? What direction is this going to take us in? And I kept thinking like there was definitely a thread of, so Margot is the head of the Bleach Babes. She's the one that
Yeah.
figured everything out. She created basically the process that churns these new people through. And she's got it all established and figured out. And it's obviously like she spent
Yes.
a lot of time and put a lot of work into like, and probably, did a little bit of supernatural stuff to get this situation established. And then reading through the story, it's like almost leaning toward, is Vix just going to like supplant her and take over her place and be
Yeah.
that person? And it's like, that would almost be disappointing because of how you built in that kind of naivete
Mhm.
and kind of lack of knowledge or skills. And it was really just like a big kind of pile of ambition on top of like in a situation that like it was the worst case scenario, because like
Uh-huh.
if you just have ambition, you can do a thing and then get what you want, even if you're too dumb to know what it really means.
Right.
So when I was reading through the story and it was like, I could see a future where she takes over for Margot, I was like, that would probably be kind of a disappointing outcome because it wasn't earned. So when it didn't go in that direction, I was pretty happy about that.
Yeah, no, I knew from the beginning that I did not want Vix to take over. I wanted to kind of like position her as someone who was capable of doing it, simply because Margot initiates this relationship because she wants to groom her to be her protege.
Yeah.
But I was like, just based off of how Vix is incapable of thinking for herself, like that was never going to happen. She kind of bases everything that once she moves in with the Bleach Babe, she kind of bases everything about her personality, how she dresses, like how she interacts with other people, what kind of jobs she takes. She bases it around Margot. So
Yeah.
certainly she has the ambition to keep growing her career in a sense, but she doesn't have the ambition to like do any kind of like business development or planning, and probably not like engaging with the supernatural. She wouldn't even know where to start on that sense. She's just kind of, I mean, and I think that also kind of speaks to how she is at like the beginning of the book, where she's doing what she needs to do. She's growing, it's steady. But until her friend walks in and tells her about the Bleach Babes, she's not really kind of taking the next actionable steps that she needs to do in her career. She doesn't have those kind of resources, and I don't think that she has the personality to really pursue that. And it's funny because I think even at the end, like Margot accuses her of trying to do this, and she's like, "What? No, like I wasn't even thinking about that. What do you mean?"
Yep.
And it's just like, man, Vix, she's funny.
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
At one point in the story, Margot is talking about, it's like kind of in the middle of the story. I think Darlene has left, or like they're having an argument around her
right,
conversation. Vix talking to Darlene about leaving and what all this means and stuff. And Margot kind of goes into a discussion about the things that they're doing being like taking the power back, taking the power for us. And
right.
how historically, we have been marginalized and pushed down and held down and not given the power. And so this is our way of empowering ourselves. Does Margot believe that?
That's a really good question. I think Margot wants others to believe that, but I don't think Margot actually believes that. Because I think that there's this issue with, so one of the things that I tried to touch on in this book, and I will say it's hard because you're writing from the perspective, there's so many people can have different perspectives on the beauty industry and fashion, and I'm writing from the perspective of predominantly white women.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Margot says this, she's also ignoring the ways she's also kind of ignoring the ways that she's like failed to support the members of her house, and failed to like support them being able to like grow their career. Like Darlene mentioned specifically that Margot has made it very like difficult for her to build a life for herself and build her career outside of the house. So
Right.
Margot definitely wants people to believe that like marginalized people are more in control, but she's a queer woman, and she's a queer woman, which is great, but she's also super rich and was born into a very privileged lifestyle. So it's like, okay, so you're like failing to mention the fact that you were basically born like into an extraordinary amount of wealth, like not even like taking the supernatural aspect out of it. She was born into an extraordinary amount of wealth. Of course she'd be able to kind of build this sort of business, but someone like Vix is unfortunately like entirely dependent upon her, because while Vix is also a white queer woman, she's also like she does not come from a very good background, and she doesn't have the kind of education that Margot does. So
Yeah.
Margot, I think, tries to present herself as like this very girl boss character, and she's not. She's kind of almost as bad as the people that came before her, if not in some ways worse. So
Yeah, because like basically when someone joins the Bleach Babes, she literally commoditizes them. She like has them sign a
yes.
bunch of contracts and controls their whole lives, literally controls their whole lives, but makes their wish come true more or less. And so
Yeah.
um, there's a limit to how much altruism can come in that kind of a situation.
Right. Yeah. Like, I think she presents herself as this very altruistic person. And she's definitely not. Like, she's entirely in it for herself. And maybe there's a part of her that like thinks, "Oh, I'd like to uplift women," but always behind whenever she thinks about doing something altruistic or good, there's always that thought behind it of how can this make me money? How can this
Yeah.
like help me at the end of the day? How does this help my bottom line? So,
Hmm. But it's interesting because, and maybe this is just me being a real optimistic person, but in reading the story and reading Margot saying those things, in my mind, I was like, well, two things can be true. Like maybe there is a thread in her that like really believes, like in an ideal world, this would be the case, but in my specific world, this is how things need to be, or something like that. Like she believes
yeah.
it, but doesn't like maybe act on it as much or something.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so but then, all right. So this kind of leads into another part of the book, and I'll be intentionally vague so as not to spoil anything. But there is a part of the book that I put in quotes as the big gesture. Um,
Yeah.
and so, ostensibly in the story, Vix and Margot have kind of a romantic element to their relationship, and Vix is in her mind very dedicated to Margot. And because of the kind of social dynamics of the situation, she doesn't always feel like she matters to Margot, I guess, maybe.
Yeah.
And so she decides, she's kind of a little like ideas put in her head by I think it was Iona.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Lindsay, I think, told her to go talk to Iona. Yeah. To get
yeah.
the idea. Yeah.
That other people in the past have done this like big gesture to show their loyalty to Margot, and Vix doesn't hesitate. I think that goes back to the idea of just her kind of dumbly
Yeah.
not she's getting in her own way or whatever. But So there's this big gesture, and the only thing I have a question about there is like it's happened in the past and to like mixed results and everything. But then my thought is it is Margot setting it up that this is kind of an inevitability for the new Bleach babes, that they're probably going to want to make this kind of gesture.
Yes, I think that at a certain point, Margot would expect each of them to either make this gesture or to exit the group altogether.
Okay.
She wouldn't want people to exit the group altogether because I mean that way she stops making money. I mean she gets upset when Darlin leaves. But I think that with her, because this is something that's so tied to her family, in a sense it's almost like they're becoming a part of her family, and she doesn't, and like this gesture in itself is a way that they can prove her loyalty and her their trust to her, but also so that she gets the kind of a, in her mind I guess, the approval of everyone else who has come before her, every other matriarch in her family who came before her, who interacted with the demonic presence or did the gesture, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, I got that feeling. Oh damn. Yeah, and then that makes me think of, because like lately I know this is like very cliche and everything, but there's just so many cult documentaries out there, and there's like a real culty aspect to
Yes.
the Bleach Babe house where, and the real culty element of that specific situation for me is that didn't come directly from Margot. Other people had hinted or suggested this, and so even though it was kind of implicit, it's not coming from Margot, so it's not her idea. So like that had a real culty kind of feeling to me too that I thought was really well established.
Yeah, there's definitely like a culty sort of element to it, and I think that that also kind of, with the backdrop of the social media, there's so many elements of social media that can feel culty, especially with like the diehard fans, the parasocial relationships, the way that things can get taken just completely like wildly out of context, or the way that someone will try to defend another person. It definitely, sometimes interacting in online spaces, it's kind of like, is this really like a genuine nice fan base, or is this a cult? So
Yeah. That's interesting, and I'm gonna say this as general as possible because I love the people, but so let's talk about the horror book world.
yeah.
I know a lot of people who are the nicest people in the horror book world, and a lot of people in the horror book world like to say that the people in the horror book world are the nicest people, but it seems like pretty frequently there's like some really creep people that are
Yeah.
kind of outed and then like like burned to the stake. So like it's kind of an odd dichotomy that like of the people that I've met in the like 13 years that I've been talking to authors, I feel like I feel closest with horror writers, but at the same time I feel like that's where, at least, and maybe now I'm questioning, is it just that the creeps get outed more, or is it that there's more creeps, or what is it? So like
That's,
now my mind's kind of like tinkering on like what is the actual like explanation for this, but it seems like it's kind of an odd
yeah,
situation.
that's interesting. I almost think in some ways that it can be both. I think that a lot more people nowadays feel more empowered, I think, to speak out against people who are creeps in the community. And like the whisper networks are maybe not actual whisper networks as they used to be in the past when someone was being a creep, but like actual like vocal platforms. But I also think that because, yeah, like social media has become so important that perhaps it is attracting those people who are creeps a little bit more.
Yeah.
Um, because like back in the day, when I was trying to write like letters to authors or emails, it's going to like an email that's maybe managed by like their publicist. It's not like direct interaction with other people. Now more than ever before, you can interact with other people online, like your own idols online, and doesn't that just like kind of fuel some of the problem? um
Yeah. Yeah.
for sure. So
I agree. Yeah, and uh that's the trick too, because if you have such a great experience with a community of people,
Mhm.
you believe in that experience, and so maybe the guard isn't as up as it should be with. But then there's like the creeps are the type of people who are like, I'm going to spend the energy becoming ingrained in this community because then I get the thing I
Right.
want, which is to like be a creep to people. So
Right.
anyway, we don't like the creeps. We like the good people. Yeah, that was just interesting. Like the horror people specifically, I feel like are some of my best friends in real life are horror writer people. Um, so there's something about, and I think it's like the whole like I'm totally going off on a tangent. I apologize. We're supposed to be talking about your story, but it's the whole idea of like how horror plays with your empathy and like
Yeah.
works your empathy. That I think you get people who are more empathetic and more, I don't know, good. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah. I agree. I think that there are a lot of people in the horror community that are attracted to writing horror because of like bad experiences that they've had and like trauma that they've had. Um that's why I write a lot of it. But and so yeah, I think that one thing that I like about the horror community, and like I love writing in other genres too. I don't want to like talk trash about other genres or anything like that. But I think that one of the things I love about the horror community is that because we're so normalized to with like things that make us uncomfortable or terrified or horrified, I think that that lends it's that a lot of the community lends itself to being a little bit more open-minded. Like we're more interested in exploring things that are weird or perhaps subjects that are a little more taboo or talking about things. I know that there are in some circles online that there are people that don't want to talk about like essay, or they will say that they don't want like any essay in
Hmm.
their books at all. And like I understand like from a reader perspective not wanting to see those things, but then I don't understand like the hatred towards the existence of it. And I think that
Right.
people in the horror community are less likely to kind of fall into that sort of situation, where as long as people are utilizing content warnings and they're prepared for what's in the story, as long as it's a good story and as long as it explores like a taboo subject like holistically, then that's kind of to that then I think people are more comfortable with it and I think they're fine with it.
Uh, you
Yeah.
said it perfectly. And the example I would give is like, did you read Everything the Darkness Eats by Eric LaRocca?
No, I actually haven't read that one yet. No,
Okay.
but I've read
It's
most of
got,
their.
yeah, it's got a very specific scene that's just really heavy, um, and hard to get through. And so like, but I appreciate why it's in the story, and I
Mhm.
understand the like how it contributes to the story. But I've got a friend who can't stomach that type of content,
Right.
and he's a Minnesota person.
Oh,
So yeah.
very cool.
Um, and so I would just say to him, "Oh man, this is an awesome book, but you probably won't like it because of this," and then move on because if you just can't, like if it's not going to benefit you to read that stuff and you know that and you choose to avoid that, I'm going to do my best to help you avoid avoid that.
Right.
Um, but like, yeah, I like it when people shoot like don't shy away from hard content if it makes the story that they're telling more
Right.
what it's supposed to be or whatever. I know I'm being very vague with what I'm saying, but I think
Right. Like
I get the idea.
if it addresses like a certain issue and brings like a certain type of experience to light that maybe hasn't been explored before, that can
Right.
also be like very valuable to see.
Hmm.
For
Yeah. See,
sure.
you're just way more succinct than me. I bumble through saying things and you say it better. So I'm gonna defer to what you say. Um, Back to mewing a little bit. First of all, and I'm so terrible at this. I really like the cover. So,
Yeah.
and I know that Shortwave. I can't remember the name of the gentleman who runs Shortwave. He does a lot of the cover design too, right?
Alan. Yep, Alan did this cover design. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So he did the Narcissus, Adam
Yes.
Godfrey one,
Yep, he did that
and
one. Yep.
I really liked that. And so actually, because I saw the cover for this and eventually talked to the author on my podcast, that put shortwave on my radar. And so when I was like, what's coming out? I was looking at what they're releasing and I saw your cover and here we are. So the don't judge a book by your cover thing is complete nonsense because like that cover got me started. And then I kind of read what the general kind of synopsis of the story was. And I was like, I am so in for this. So yeah, great cover. Great cover art.
Yeah, I really love the cover art. When I was kind of writing the draft, I envisioned sort of doing something that maybe like an X-ray that would kind of, because I remember talking to
Oh yeah.
Alan about it and saying I kind of wanted to do like an X-ray of someone, like a side profile, with like their tongue on the roof of their mouth, but I wasn't sure like how. I mean, how are you going to find that image? Like
Right.
it would be something that would be very hard to find. And so what I like about the cover is that I think it sort of combines all it kind of really captures the essence of the book in the sense that you've got like the girl who's crying on the cover, the girl who's like kind of traumatized, and then the exposed bone just kind of representing sort of the horrors, like the body horror to come. And
Yeah.
so I think that we tossed around like a couple other ideas, but I can't even remember what the earliest drafts looked like for the cover art. But when he sent me that, he just kind of sent it to me out of the blue, and he's like, "Yeah, I think I changed the idea in the cover art, and like here it is." And I was like, "Oh, like this is perfect! Like I think that this is working really well." And yeah, so I'm super happy with it. I think it's just like it's gorgeous. I love it.
Yeah. Um, and so I talked about this as so a previous episode I did was um, like a 2024 horror preview with Becky Spratford and Emily Hughes, who does the that big list of like everything that's coming
Yes.
out in 2024. And your book was one of the ones I was looking forward to. And it's the funniest moment because I was like, it's called Mewing. I said, do you know what Mewing is? And they're like, no. And so I started to explain it, and Becky Spratford was like, "My Gen Z kids were just talking about this," and it was like this, like, like really like topical thing that was happening in the moment. But I had it, but like I had heard someone talking about it somewhere also, um, just before seeing, seeing the cover for the first time, and I was like, "Oh, that's that thing." And so that's that. So like, I think that term is kind of like um a right place, right time kind of thing to use right now too, because it seems like it's a newer kind of term, or at least like in my knowledge. But
Yeah.
like yeah, so it's got a lot of like currency right now as far as like people understanding it or knowing what it means, like a shorthand for a thing kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think that with mewing, like it's just such a small, interesting thing that I can't even remember how I learned about it. I want to say that it might have been through like a BuzzFeed article of some kind where they were talking about the ways that actors pose and Instagram models pose to get like that perfect smile. Like this
Yeah.
little tiny trick that they do behind the scenes. That's not actually it's not genuinely how they smile. Like I doubt that people are always going to be like tongue on the roof of the mouth, like smiling when they're taking photos like with their friends or things like that. But it kind of gives you the illusion of like this perfect jawline and like this lovely smile. And I was like, well, isn't that just like the great kind of isn't that just kind of like a great way to sort of kick off the book, is that you don't know what these people are like. They're presenting this fake version of themselves, including like this fake smile. And then trying to figure out, as I was writing the book, tried to figure out ways to sort of tie that into the body horror with
Yeah.
this sense that she loses her voice at a certain point due to a certain
Hmm.
specific incident. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will not mention that, but there was like that was such a cool moment because like, and you had built in elements of like how she could get away with this thing that she does, and it was just so well executed, and like um and it is a moment where no, I'm just not going to say anything because I'm just going to give away stuff because I'm going to like reference other
It's
things that are
hard.
similar, but it's got that the feeling it gave me was like, oh damn, this is like a it created a moment that was like, we can't go back from this. kind of,
Yeah.
when she does a thing. And that was a really cool moment because I was like, okay, whatever happens from here is just going to be weird or sad, or there's nothing good is coming out of this.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of almost like the final sacrifice that she makes, and like just the complete absolution of who she is as a person, I would say, because it's just like, really, you're going to do this big extra, like, not painful because she's not feeling pain at this point after the gesture, but she's doing something that's essentially going to take away her voice completely, and it's
Hmm.
like, you're really going to this kind of length just so that you can win Margot's favor and grow your career. It's, man, it's very, it is very sad, because I think that she is a young girl who, as a young woman, I should say, she's like in her early 20s. She's a young woman who is very naive, but like, definitely, I mean, if she had stopped thinking of, if she had stopped to think and like consider her choices, I wonder like if we would have ended up with a different story. But then I
Yeah.
think that that's not the story that I would have wanted to tell at the same time.
No,
Yeah.
I don't want to read a different version where that doesn't happen, because I was just like,
Yeah.
oh, god damn. But
Yeah.
I forgot to mention something that happens earlier in the book. Because I go so much into themes and talk about the serious stuff, and then I'm like, wait, there's horror. Um,
Mhm.
and so one of the more chilling or disturbing or awkward or weird scenes happens pretty early in the story. So Vix has just gotten to the Bleach Babe's house, and one of the kind of traditions of the group is that the new person chooses like this dinner. They do a dinner every week on this certain day. And so she just chose like veggie burgers and some other stuff, like a chickpea salad kind of thing or whatever. And
Uh-huh.
there's another person in the house who, because of, some choices she's made, eating is a real challenge for her. And so
Right.
um, there's I wrote the eat the burger moment is what I wrote in my notes. And so like it goes from being awkward to like, oh, this is kind of funny, kind of whatever, to like,
Uh-huh.
oh no, this is going too far, to like,
Yeah.
this is pretty horrifying. And I feel like because you didn't know what the outcome was going to be, it got very like Lord of the Flies, like real quick, like the
Yes.
whole like mob mentality of like, I think that if I was just me, it wouldn't have turned out this way. But since the whole group is doing this thing, I guess I'll do it too. So that was a cool kind of like, as far as like horror moments goes, like the eat the burger moment was a pretty rough thing to read.
Yeah, it's very yeah, I kind of wanted to set it up as this moment where, I think that when you learn about Margot, you might think that she's a little bit altruistic with the romantic element. I think it can kind of like um might impede someone's perceptions of who Margot is as a person, and maybe you think, "Oh, she's just like this altruistic billionaire. It's like a love story. Like, she's just gonna take this girl under her wing. It's a billionaire like, it's a little billionaire romance kind of plot." And then you actually get into, this is kind of the first moment of how you see that how she truly leads this house.
Yeah.
And to basically let the reader know, nope, no, you can't trust her. Um, and I think it also, I really love the scene just from just the perspective of I there's situations in my life where like some messed up things have happened and I've kind of been a fly on the wall. And I think what's interesting is just having Vix be this fly on the wall, almost just like witnessing everything that's happening before her, but ultimately not doing anything to stop it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, with the mom mentality, it's really hard to fight back against that. It's very hard to find your voice, and she's not the kind of character that's going to find her voice in that situation. So,
Yeah, because like in her mind, this was her one opportunity, and if she does the thing that any normal person would do, she just blew her one opportunity. Like that's kind of her
right.
mentality. But what it does from like a storytelling perspective, at least as far as I'm concerned, is it tells you right then nobody's safe.
Yes. Yes.
So I thought that was a very effective way at the beginning to be like, I don't care. Like you were just saying, like everything feels comfortable. You needed a moment to tell you, like, yeah, like shit might be not so great.
Right. Things might not be good. Like this woman might not be operating under the best like pretenses here. She's
Yeah.
not for sure. Yeah.
But like, and then like it also tests loyalty. It tests how far will people go. So there's a lot of utility to that scene where it's like, how much will you fall in line? What do I have to do to push you to fall in line? So there's a lot of that kind of like opportunity in that situation too.
Right. Margot definitely challenges the girls a lot in that scene, and some of them fall in line almost immediately, like Lindsay for example, like already is picking and Lindsay definitely is the type of character that I think has already pretty much fallen in line with what Margot wants. So it's I think it's also just an interesting showcase of the others' personalities. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it does kind of introduce you to the group too. That's a good point. Yeah, it was a very like high utility scene from a storytelling perspective. You got a lot accomplished there, so that's really cool.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Um,
I wasn't sure. It seems like it shouldn't be that horrific, and I was like, I wonder if it'll actually come across like that intense, or if people will find it like like too comedic when it's supposed to be messed up. So to hear that it's a good example of storytelling, like I'm very happy about that. Thank you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I thought so. And I know that I overthink things, so like who knows, but like I definitely found that, and honestly, the tell is going to be if like that's what people mention, it was an effective scene. Like if people really like eat the burger as a
Yeah.
thing, then you know that it was an effective scene. So yeah.
Yeah.
So like when I started
Cool.
saying it, I knew you knew what I was talking about. So um, yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's a really good scene. Um, and then I guess kind of wrapping up talking about mewing. Was there any kind of because we kind of talked about some of the themes
Mhm.
um, and the meaning behind some of the stuff that happens and everything. Was there any kind of inspiration that, or like, are there any like stories that you were like, I'm kind of going for this feel, or is there an allegory there, or is this kind of like your own original thought based on the things that we talked about?
It's kind of my own original thought based on the things that I talked about. It's definitely like I think I wrote in the acknowledgement section. It's hard to remember what specifically I wrote in my acknowledgement section, but I remember when I was in graduate school, I went there for film school, and I
Hmm.
did shot a little horror film called Serotonin, and Serotonin was about a girl who started to do like these procedures on herself on her body so that she could resemble like one of her favorite influencers and I because that was like a project for school, it was for my graduate degree. There were things that I had to kind of whittle down or take away to sort of like appease like different people in that evaluation process. And so and also there's limitations because it's just like you can't make I think that film was shot on a budget of like $6,500 around
Hmm.
there. And so there's a limitation in terms of what we could do. It was a short amount of time. And so I remember finishing Serotonin, and I remember thinking that there were so many other things that I could say about this specific subject, but I was like, I don't want to deal, I don't want to start another GoFundMe. I don't want to start another.
Yeah.
I went on Seed and Spark, I think, to do that campaign, and that was a horrible experience, which I will save for like another time, but it was terrible. And I was just like, I don't want to ask people for money. I just want to kind of write the thing that I want to be able to explore this. So that's what I did. That's kind of how I started it. But I also thinking about like thinking about mewing makes me think about serotonin, and then it makes me think about the things that influence the development of serotonin. Swallow, I don't know if you've seen that film, but Swallow
I
was
know of it.
definitely, yeah,
I
Swallow
haven't
was a
seen it, but
film.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a film about a woman, pregnant woman with I can never pronounce it, but it's either pica or pica. And I thought a lot about kind of the visuals in Swallow, and thought a lot about kind of that intense storyline, which is also it at its core is a story about an abusive relationship and someone escaping an abusive relationship. And so some of those elements I think have made their way into Mewing, and some of like the sort of like quiet body horror elements have made their way into Mewing as well. Mewing I think just has a more supernatural take and is like less entirely focused on the abusive relationship and more about the gosh, how to say this, more about like the social media element, the body horror element, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But Swallow is a very interesting film in that it presents how eating is kind of used as a symbol of control, and a lot of people with like eating disorders and things like that. A lot of times when people like restrict food or don't eat or don't eat or do those kinds of habits, it's because that they're trying to regain control. So when this woman with her pica, she's eating these things, she's eating things that she knows she's not supposed to eat, because she's trying to regain the sense of control over her life, because so much of it is being curated for her by her husband and his family. And so I think a little bit of that, food as a method of control, or eating habits as a method of control, definitely made their way into Mewing. So yeah, actually,
Yeah.
wow, it's been a long time since I thought about Swallow, but I think that definitely made its way into Mewing.
That
Yeah.
ended up being one of those. There's so many movies that I know I would dig that I'm just too scared to watch, because then I'd have to think about the stuff, not from like
Yeah.
a gross out perspective, but like from like a dealing with the emotions and the psychology behind stuff. Kind of like there's so many movies where I'm like, I need to watch this, but like I'm a little bit, I'm not, I have to work myself up to be in the right place for it. So that was kind of in that category, I think.
Yeah, there's still like a long list of horror films that I need to watch that like I've just kind of been bracing myself for.
Yeah.
I've seen so
Yep.
many classic slashers and things like that, a lot of classics, and it's like kind of the weird like independent ones I think that I need to like dive into more, and those are the ones that I think are the real stomach turners.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
excited for those, but also like, oh man, I know I'm going to have nightmares.
Yep. Same thing. I'm kind
Yeah.
of a wimp about it. All right. So zooming out a little bit from Mewing to like, uh, I went from, so I'm a new reader of you. I know that you've got stuff that you've released previously. I went from being interested in this novella to seeing. Oh, by the way, I'm just going to say for anybody listening, this is a novella, and so I read the first like 25%. I read, before going to sleep one night, and then the rest of it in one train ride to work, and it was just like
Wow.
a real ride. So it's a quick and it's an entertaining read. So I'm just gonna put that out there as well. Um, but then like, looking into your social media and everything, I was like, oh man, I'm trying to talk to this person about um, a novella that's coming out in February, and I realized you had something come out like in
Yes.
January too. So
I've got
like,
that. Yeah. Right
so
here on my
for the audio only people, it's another novella called An Affinity for Formaldehyde, which just released in January from Grindhouse. And so I ordered it, but I'm doing this crazy reread of some stuff for the podcast, and so I didn't get a chance to read it before we talked. And then like
Mhm.
looking deeper into, so you did just do a cover reveal for something that's coming out later this year,
Yes.
called Haunting Melody.
Yes.
But you've got a couple of other things, Vicarious,
Yep.
Monster Sona. So like, and
Yep.
and and so all of a sudden I'm like, is this person just constantly releasing things? Like, are you a very prolific person, or is this like a moment where there's kind of a lot of stuff is packed in all at the same time?
Okay, a little bit in regards to that, I think it's a little bit of both. Writing has just always been like one of my favorite pastimes. Like when I was a little kid and I was like 10, I was probably playing around on my parents' computer more than I was playing with like my dollhouses, and just like sitting there and writing things in Word. And that's I think how I got to be such a fast typer too, so that
Mm,
really worked to my benefit. So writing has just always been this really great outlet for me, and even when I don't necessarily want to write a book or I don't have an idea for a book, I almost always like want to write something each day. It just really kind of helps me with like it helps me. I think it's a really good outlet. I think it helps me regulate myself a little bit, and it brings a lot of joy. But with this has just been like a really wild past couple of years because I actually tried to like map it out. I was kind of like, okay, how much time am I spending on my computer? At the beginning of this month, at the beginning of January, I should say, I was like, how much time am I actually spending on my computer? Do I need to go outside more? And I tried
yeah.
to like do kind of get a map out of when I stopped and started these projects. And yeah, pretty much a lot of them came out, were finished one after the other. Mewing, I think, was originally written back in 2021. So it's actually been some time for that to come out. I think it took like a couple years for that to get picked up. So it's just by an chance that it's kind of it's coming out now. Um, but Haunting Melody and Vicarious and An Affinity for Formaldehyde, and then one other novella that hasn't been picked up yet. Those were all written or finished. Like the manuscript was finished like last year. Like Haunting
Hmm.
Melody, as soon as Monster Sona was done, I finished Haunting Melody. I sent that to my publisher. And then Vicarious, I actually think I was considering submitting that to Grindhouse because I knew I wanted to work with Grindhouse.
Hmm.
But then I saw that Grindhouse was like on their submission guidelines, they were less looking for serial killers. And I'm like, damn it. But like, that's, that's literally what this character is. Like, I can talk about all the other elements in it all I want, but she's really just a serial killer. And so I was like, damn it. Okay. So I finished it because it was just so much fun to write. Vicarious, I think, has been so much fun to write. And then after that, I went into an affinity, which they Grindhouse at the time was looking for like hagsploitation and things like that, where and I was like, oh, there are so many interesting things that I can say about like relationships with older relatives in the family and things like that. And so that I
Hmm.
think kind of kickstarted affinity. So last year I just was really busy. I had a lot going on in terms of what I wanted to say. I was also kind of dealing with I was diagnosed with PTSD a couple years back now, I think. It's hard to remember. And it was hard for me, I think, in some ways to leave my house. So
Okay.
it
Yeah.
was nice. So I think writing became another sort of outlet for me where it was the one thing that I was doing and I did it to help process a lot of things. And so it helped like it helped a lot. And it was just kind of I think the result of like trying to recover from things, staying inside a lot, I ended up writing a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was just kind of blown away. I was like, "There's a new title. There's another title. There's another title."
Yeah.
But no, I'm really excited about. So I picked up Affinity for Formaldehyde once I finished Mewing. I was like, "All right, I'm going to read more of your stuff." And the premise just sounds really cool.
Yeah.
So, can you give a quick pitch of Affinity for Formaldehyde?
Yeah, An Affinity for Formaldehyde is about a queer woman named Lou who returns to her hometown to stop her childhood best friend Max from marrying her grandmother, Paula. And when she gets there and tries to stop what's happening, she realizes that they need her for something and that they're not going to let her go home anytime soon. And so ensues like a bunch of very psychotic and terrible like science experiments that defy like the laws of man, like the laws of any kind of ethical code. And I think it's just yeah, I think it's just it's a really it's meant to be like a really interesting conversation I think on ageism, and I wanted to also talk about like generational trauma.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of what it focuses on and so it kind of cycles through.
And that's, I think, knowing what the general idea of that story was, plus having read Mewing, was where I was like, this person's just not afraid to talk about fucked up things. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it was really
Yeah.
cool. So, that's definitely definitely excited to dive into that. And selfishly, so this came up in my 2024 horror preview.
Mhm.
I read, I'm not a huge reader, but I read, I want to say I read like 32, 33 books last year. And there was a part where I got into the air where I was like, man, if there were just some novellas,
Yeah.
um, I could get more stories. Because I feel like right now, and people might have opinions on this, most traditionally published books are about 320 to 340 pages. I don't know what
Mhm.
it is about like everything is that number of pages.
Mhm.
If you look at like classic books, like a lot of like the classics are like 180 to 240 pages and I'm like, where are those
Right,
books? And so like
right.
selfishly, in order to consume more stories and like maybe have more conversations, I'm like, I need to bring more novellas into my life. And so the fact that you seem to be putting out um, good chunks of novellas is like encouraging to me. It's like maybe people are embracing the idea of novellas.
Yeah, I love novellas as a form. Like, I don't think I could read as much as I do if I wasn't reading a ton of novellas, just because, yeah, I've got quite a number of books on my shelf. I don't know how many of them that you can see from this angle, but yeah, like it's hard because there's so much that I want to read, but when I get the book or I buy the book and it's yeah, it's 300, 400 something pages and I'm like, okay, this is going to probably like, even if I set aside dedicated time to read every night, this is probably going to take like a week, maybe two, to comb through at best. And I really love novellas as a format because I think that while a book is supposed to kind of be a universe, a novella is like a snapshot of a universe. It's like a photograph of the universe. And
Mhm.
so there's a lot that you can talk about within novellas, but you don't necessarily have to explain all the world rules for people to get it. Like I don't
Yeah.
I don't think in Mewing you need to explain where the demonic presence comes from. It's just there. I don't think we need to do a whole backstory on Margot's family and why they got tied up with this demon. It's just all that's all you need to know is that there's like this whole connection between that. And so what I like about novellas is that it kind of fast tracks a lot of this world building, but it also just gives and by doing that I think it kind of lends itself to more interesting conversations between characters. I think it lends itself to like better stretches of dialogue and things like that. I really just love novellas as a format, and then like you were saying, I hope that they become more popular. I know that some like agents and individuals and like the literature community I think don't think the market's there yet, but I honestly think more people would read if there were more novellas. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like sometimes there's an opportunity for novellas to resonate, I think, more for a longer duration. Like, I'm a big fan of Zoya Stage. I think she's a great author, and she's got like a fairy tale kind of novella called "The Girl Who Outgrew the World," and it's like 150, 160 pages, something like that. But
Mhm.
like every time I think about that book, like my heart reacts. Like there's something about that story that she packs into that number of pages that there's not all this extraneous detail, kind of like what you were saying. Like it's to the heart of the matter, and it's just the stuff that, like, she doesn't explain how any of the supernatural stuff is happening in the book. Like you said, she just says what's happening, and there's so many narrative ways to shortcut that. Like we're seeing things from a young girl's perspective. She doesn't know why things are happening. That's all we need to know, is like that it's happening to her and she doesn't get it. So
Right.
like it doesn't take away from the story that we don't know because we're seeing it from her perspective. But anyway, like I think sometimes when it's just to the heart of the matter and that's all you're getting, like it almost kind of maybe can stay with you longer, or like not, the point doesn't get lost in a bunch of other stuff too.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. I think that some of the novellas that I've read from like Christopher Triana, like Haley Piper, reading like Queen of Teeth and things like that, like those have definitely stuck in my mind because I mean, you're just kind of they just launch you right into the journey.
Yeah.
And when you're kind of strapped in, you're like buckled in to do it. It just kind of takes you through very fast. And I love that they can still have an impact or like resonate with me after I've like closed that final final page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One that I read recently, and this isn't going to get into like a let's talk about all of the cool novellas thing, but it was a book called The Crane Husband by Kelly Barnhill.
Oh, okay. I've
Oh
heard of
man,
that. Yeah.
and it was the reason that I read it was because she had had some sort of traumatic brain injury, and this was a book that she had written after. And there was a whole like I read an article about how like it was a challenge for her to write the way that she had before because she had this injury, and so like
Mm,
um there was that whole I was like, oh, that's compelling. Like imagine being someone who needs this in order to
mhm.
do the thing that they love, and now that's threatened. So like
Yeah.
just as a person, the whole story was compelling. And then I read that in like an hour, and I was like, man, this is such a fucking great story.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like I'll talk about it as much as I can because it's so good. But anyway, yeah, great novella. So all right, wrapping up our conversation. First of all, I'm not going to thank you yet because like I'm going to ask you to tell us stuff. But
Sure.
is there anything? Because we were talking about like the idea of novellas and stuff. Is there anything that you've read recently or that you're looking forward to reading that you really just want to like gush about?
Yeah, something that I've read recently, I read Cat Valur's The Desert Island game that recently came out. Cat I got pointed onto it because Slashic Horror, who was my publisher for Vicarious, they reached out and they wanted a blurb for the novella. And it's a really excellent short thriller read that kind of explores the idea of what would happen if it's the end of the world and you had to live on like a desert island with someone. But it gets like a little bit more twisted than that. Like there's other things that go into it that just kind of turn into this like total mind-boggling experience that left me on the edge of my seat. I love that one. Similarly, I think Stephanie Sander Jacobs, also with Slashic, is releasing Pyramidia, which I think is a vampire story about an MLM marketing scheme. So
Oh,
it's
nice.
yeah, so it seems very funny. And it's just a very interesting concept, and I'm honestly a little mad that I didn't think about like that MLM scheme because I'm like, damn it, that is horrifying. That is such a
Yes.
good like premise for a horror book. And then I also recently read Remy Oliver's Panic Playhouse, which is an extreme horror novella that is about a couple of kids who go on a joyride and they end up, and it just basically goes horribly wrong. And they end up kind of getting involved in some dark web stuff. And that is when I do read a lot of horror books, that's pretty much the predominant thing that I read. If I'm not reading like rom-coms, I'm reading horror. And this was something that honestly like sickened me to my core. And I love that I had that kind of visceral reaction because I think it's when you read so much horror, it gets to a point where you're like, it's I love the stories and things like that, but it's hard for me to get like an emotional reaction like of just like disgust. And I
Mm,
love that. Like Panic Playhouse absolutely does that. And Panic Playhouse, I think, came out not today, but like a couple of days ago. So it's out right now.
cool.
And I think it's a really great fast read. Yeah.
Awesome. Very cool. And how would people be able to connect with you in general, online or whatever?
Yeah, you can find me on my website, which is chloespenceronline.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Chloe Spencer Dev, DEV, because I was a game developer for a time. Technically still am. I need to get back to working on my game. And then I have an Instagram and a TikTok that's at Hey It's Chloe Spencer.
Awesome. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for taking some time to talk to me about mewing. I think that I'm lucky because it's one thing to read something and enjoy it, but then it's another thing to be able to talk to the person who made it. So I'm very thankful that I get to do this kind of stuff. So thanks for taking the time to talk to me, but also thanks for creating something that was hugely entertaining to read.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you for so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. Yeah, and I'm glad that you enjoyed it. It's very weird. So it's you never know what'll happen if people will enjoy it or not. Yeah.